I always had a soft spot for the kids who didn't fit in nerds, geeks, dweebs, dorks, weirdos, rejects, nobodies, misfits, losers or even other outsiders, like myself whatever our label. We all had one thing in common deemed unworthy by the popular kids because we didn't conform to their societal norms. We were often bullied, teased, shoved in lockers, and beaten up. So, we had to stick together which is why, when Franklin showed up to junior homeroom in the spring of 1995, every inch of his body completely wrapped in gauze from head to toe, including his abnormally large potbelly, I couldn't help but be intrigued No one knew where he came from or why, but the running theory was that his childhood home had burned down, and he barely survived, leaving his body covered in burns that he covered up in gauze to prevent unwarranted ridicule. I would have asked him myself, since he sat directly in front of me in homeroom, but the thing about Franklin was, he didn't really talk, or communicate in any way, sign language or otherwise So during lunch break, I found other ways to communicate with him, like drawing pictures of things, which he seemed to like, often nodding and grunting when happy. Now, I don't know if it was because I was just a hopeless romantic emo girl, or miss my best friend and childhood crush, Brian, who had gone missing just a few weeks prior. But Franklin very quickly filled the void that Brian once did and within a couple weeks, I was convinced that I was in love Franklin, on the other hand, remained coy and difficult to read. But after the countless hours we spent together, I was starting to sense that he might be warming up to me as well. So, when the prom came around that May, I knew what I had to do double quotes Frank and double quotes He turned and looked at me There's something I want to ask you double quotes He grunted and tilted his head to the side, as if anticipating my question double quotes will you go to the prom with me? He paused for a moment and simply stared at me for a while, during which time my palms grew sweaty and my knee began tapping nervously until he eventually grunted, which I took as an enthusiastic yes double quotes Now, it's important to know that just before the prom, another one of our classmates went missing, having disappeared under the same circumstances as Brian, leaving home for school one day and never returning But luckily, rather than cancel the prom, the school just brought on twice as many chaperones as they usually did. The night of the prom was magical. After helping Franklin climb into a suit, his bandages often catching on it and revealing a surprisingly hairy body underneath them, I took his hands and pinned a corsage onto my dress We then proceeded to walk from my house to the school, hand in hand, as my parents looked on, surely confused by my choice of date, but happy that I was happy. When we first arrived at the prom, I was taken aback by the presentation. Our sad little gym, which I normally wouldn't be caught dead in, had been transformed into a romantic wonderland, complete with a disco ball, streamers, and balloons, and packed with teenagers dressed to the nines. After we each grabbed some punch from the punch bowl, a slow song came on over the loudspeakers. I took Franklin by the hand, led him out onto the dance floor, and, slow dancing for a while, rested my head on his shoulder. And for a brief moment, all was well in the world But after the dance, Franklin grew restless and set off to what I thought was the bathroom. I waited for a good 15 minutes, and Franklin didn't return. Went to see what was the matter exiting the gym and heading off down the uncharacteristically darkened hallway. I remember hearing the prom music fade off into the distance. I ventured deeper and deeper into the school that single quotes S when I heard another noise. Sure enough, it sounded like Franklin's grunting, but louder and different than usual double quotes Franklin. I called out, my voice echoing down the hallway but he didn't reply. I just continued to hear the same grunting sound, growing louder and louder as I neared a corner ... and when I finally turned it, my heart sank as I saw Franklin seemingly making out with another girl ... double quotes Franklin, how dare you? I cried out. That's when he turned around, and I saw that he wasn't making out with the girl ... He was devouring her ... and behind the gauze that was once wrapped around his face, which had now come unraveled, I saw a horrifying mouth, made up of both a set of mandibles and razor-sharp teeth, with blood pouring out of it ... Franklin dropped the girl, whose mangled body fell to the floor with a splash as it landed in her own pool of blood. He then proceeded to stare at me as the gauze covering his pot belly unraveled, and two more sets of arms unfolded ... That single quotes S when I realized that Franklin was no burned victim. He was a cryptid, and the bodies that had been disappearing were surely his doing. Bodies that included my former best friend, Brian ... You monster. I cried out, my love for him turning to contempt. You killed Brian. But he showed no remorse, instead slowly approaching, all four of his arms raised, his mandibles clicking away ... Not knowing what else to do, I ran as fast as I could, down the dark hallways to the very cafeteria, where Franklin and I had once bonded ... Sensing him behind me, I hopped the divider separating the cafeteria from the kitchen, and hid in the corner of the room. That's when I heard him hop the divider as well, the sound of his clicking mandibles growing louder and louder as he closed in on me ... I sat there, cowering in the corner of the kitchen, crying and shaking, reflecting on the fact that Franklin had turned from love of my life to literal monster in a single night, and knew what I had to do. So when he finally reached the spot where I was hiding, I reached for a butcher knife, hopped out from my hiding spot, and proceeded to flail it around intensely as I could, hacking his arms and legs off and leaving him lying there, green goo oozing out of his torso. As he writhed like a swatted bug in its final moments, Franklin simply looked up at me, a look of sadness in his insectoid eyes. That's when I noticed something dangling from one of his severed arms ... Upon further inspection, I saw that it was one of the drawings I had made for him when I first asked him to the prom, a drawing of him and me, in a suit and dress respectively, holding hands, a ray of sunshine suspended in the sky above us. But before I could react, my prom date's eyes closed, and his body stopped moving ... Franklin was dead ... A tear rolled down my cheek as I dropped the butcher knife, my hands still shaking in fear ... And despite the fact that I felt terrible for doing what I had done, deep down inside I knew that he had killed Brian and a couple other classmates, and surely wouldn't have stopped anytime soon. A little while later, I dragged Franklin's body and limbs out one of the side doors and buried him in the woods behind the high school, where a large stone still marks his grave to this day ... Years later, while the disappearances of those few students still remain a mystery to the police. Only I know the identity of the monster that was responsible for their deaths ... Franklin, my cryptid prom date. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, CA to Albuquerque, NM. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all to lane roads through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, CA. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for satanic group activity. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign, just to prove I was their two friends who dared me to take that Route I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stop sideways across both lanes. A suitcase opened with clothes scattered everywhere and to bodies lying face down in the road. A man and a woman. What the fuck? I thought. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber around. Something seemed very wrong. It looked perfect as if it were staged. An ambush. Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was a horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. The smell of burning rubber filled my lungs. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple 100 feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. I felt my heart rate increase so much that it was practically bursting out of my chest. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I would have texted anybody to let them know what had happened, but there is little to no service out in Amboy. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. It seems like such a silly thing to worry about, doesn't it? I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why there might be holes in your yard. Dogs, moles, neighborhood children. All very ordinary things. Very common. Nothing to fret over. Perfectly normal. I guess the problem, for me at least, is that the hole itself isn't perfectly normal. It's just, it doesn't really look like a hole, you know. One morning, a few days ago, I walked out of my house on my way to work and there it was. Or rather, it wasn't. The hole looks exactly like the patch of grass that used to be there. No blemishes, no markings, no visible sign at all that there's a hole in that spot, and yet I am certain there is one. It's like somewhere between the light reaching my eyes and my brain forming an interpretation of what I'm seeing. The information is just being planted in my mind. There is a hole, even if there isn't one. I've tried showing it to people. Even that first time I saw it, I flagged down my neighbor, Mrs. Elwood, who was out for a morning jog. I asked her if there was anything weird about my lawn, and when she said there wasn't, I even directed her to the exact spot where the hole was, but she couldn't perceive it. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because it's my yard or whatever, but nobody else I've shown it to gets the same epiphany about the hole that I do. I'm the only one who can see it. I still went to work that morning. I mean, there's not really anything I could do about it, right? And it's not like the hole was bugging anyone other than me, that is. So I went and managed to get through my workday, even with how distracted I was. I started to worry more when I got back. The thing is, I distinctly remembered how big the hole had been that morning. Only about the size of a golf ball, nothing too concerning. Except that now it was about the size of a dinner plate. It was growing. I didn't end up sleeping very well that night. I tried everything. Deep breaths, drinking tea, even counting sheep. But I just couldn't stop thinking about that stupid hole. Eventually, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I decided that I might as well stop trying. So I spent the rest of the night looking out my front window, watching the hole grow little by little. By 8 o'clock, it was the size of a dartboard. I did end up calling out of work this time. I hadn't slept a wink, and as I was staring at the hole that morning, I had the misfortune of seeing a squirrel fall into it. It was incredibly surreal. 1 second, the creature was scampering across the lawn, and the next it wasn't. It was just gone, poof, into thin air. The revelation that things could enter the hole was particularly troubling. I mean, that's a huge safety hazard, isn't it? Even forgetting the absolute headache this was going to be if I ever needed to do some gardening. What about all the innocent people and animals who couldn't see the thing? My street has a bunch of stray cats, and it wasn't unheard of for kids to stray onto neighbors' lawns either. I couldn't just let them fall prey to the hole. But at the same time, what could I do? Set up cones. I'd look like a madman, blocking off what was, to the casual observer, a completely ordinary patch of yard. Who does that? I spent most of the day alternating between pacing around the house, trying to puzzle out a solution to the ever-growing problem, and sitting in front of the window, watching the hole swell to the size of a manhole cover, then a truck tire, then a dining room table. That evening, I decided that I wouldn't be able to solve anything if I didn't get some sleep. So I left my house for the first time that day, creeping gingerly down my driveway and staring at the hole, waiting for it to make any sudden moves. It didn't, and I could almost imagine it laughing at how stupid I looked, sneaking out to my own car and staring at an empty stretch of grass. I managed to get myself some melatonin gummies at my town's 24-hour pharmacy, and when I got home, the hole had, thankfully, remained approximately the same size. I crept back into my house, took a few gummies, and, blissfully, felt my mind finally start to calm. As I snuggled into bed, I felt sleep come at last. My eyes drifted close, and my last thought, before I fell completely unconscious, was one of fresh resolve. That was yesterday. When I woke up this morning, that determination was still with me. I marched into the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and strode bravely to the front door, ready to confront the problem once and for all. I flung it open, felt sunlight stream across my face, and immediately felt violently sick to my stomach. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started running around my house like a crazy person, ensuring that all my doors and windows were locked and covered. I'm writing this now from my bedroom. It's 11:20 in the morning, and I've called out of work again. I don't know how long I can keep this up before I lose my job, but I do know that leaving my house is absolutely out of the question, at least for the time being. When I opened the door this morning, the hole had grown to the size of a small car. Concerning, to be sure, but not the cause of my immediate terror. See, I guess I was so preoccupied thinking about all the things that could fall into the hole that I didn't even consider that something might come out. But something did come out. Something crawled right out of that stupid hole and walked up my front steps. When I opened the door, it was right there, waiting for me. Or rather, it wasn't.